spoilers ahead.
When I heard they were doing another biopic on Marilyn Monroe, I didn't think anything of it until I found out they were basing it on a novel called Blonde by Joyce Carol Oates. And then when I found out Ana de Armas was starring in it, I got very curious because Joyce Carol Oates has a real thing for gore and Ana de Armas has a real thing for acting. So I watched the movie, and as a horror fan, I am claiming it as one of our own. Joyce's novel is a fictional account of events that may or may not have transpired in the short and tragic life of Norma Jean Mortensen. I am claiming this movie because I think it might be one of the best examples of psychological horror that I have seen in a very long time. You can disagree if you want, but come check out the plot summary first.
The plot.
The movie opens in 1933 Los Angeles with a very young Norma Jean and her mother, played chillingly by Julianne Nicholson. As a birthday surprise, Norma Jean's shown a framed picture of her father, but she's not allowed to touch it or even tell anybody she's seen it. They were husband and wife, at least in Mother's mind. And as Norma Jean nods off that night, the photo burns an image into her young mind that will end up staying with her forever. She's woken in the middle of the night when Mother tries driving them into the heart of a fire in the Los Angeles hills. The police force her to turn around, and when they get home, Mother tries drowning her daughter in a scalding hot tub because she's furious Norma Jean's birth made her husband run away. The child escapes to the safety of a neighbor, but the safety is short-lived as the neighbor ends up dumping her in the nearest orphanage. We jump ahead a few years to Norma Jean auditioning, and as an adult, she refers to all males as daddy. During her reading, she's taken over the desk unconsensually. Then in acting class, we see her screaming in artificial terror during an exercise. The entire class is horrified by her outburst, but it leaves Norma as quickly as it came and she seems unfazed by it. Then during her audition for Don't Bother to Knock, she draws on her own life experiences to bring her to a bad place. And boy does it work. She gets the role, but it's not for her acting ability. She visits with her mother, who's now in a sanitarium, and when she tells her she's been trying to track down her father, her mother denies knowing her. Then, on the set of Don't Bother to Knock, a hallucination of her mother encourages her to cut her own throat. We see she's a nervous wreck and that she started taking pills despite the rave reviews over her performances. Then in 1952, she gets together with Charlie Chaplin Jr. and Edward C. Robinson Jr. for the kind of casual get-togethers you'd imagine only happen in Hollywood circles. Well, you don't really have to imagine it because everything's implied with HD clarity, and it's as subtle as a in the ass. Then the trio watches Niagara together in the theater where the X-rated party continues somehow. The studio suit, Mr. Shin, tells her not to be seen in public with the boys anymore because he's worried about her career. And this causes Norma Jean to create a tangible difference between herself and the Marilyn Monroe persona, who doesn't really exist. And this is the point in the story that things start to blur. The trio bond over their lack of loving parents. The boys profess to being the juniors of men who never wanted them. They all vow to love each other and stay connected forever, like a triangle. Shockingly, the triangle gets Norma Jean pregnant. When she's offered the titular role in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, she declines the offer. Initially because she's pregnant, but then because she learns Jane Russell is going to make 20 times the money she does. Another horrible visit with her mother disturbs Norma Jean so much, she decides to terminate her pregnancy out of fears she might end up doing to her child what has been done to her if she inherits her mother's condition. Then she meets the famed baseball legend Joe DiMaggio. He really seems to understand what she's going through. When she confides she's longing for a life away from Hollywood where she can be normal and have a family, he bombards her with flowers. Delighted after receiving a letter from the estranged father she never knew, she's advised somebody special is going to be waiting for her in her hotel room after the Gentlemen Prefer Blondes premiere. Despite the movie's success, she can't enjoy any of it because she's racked with guilt over the terminated pregnancy. When she gets back to her room, she's heartbroken to see the mystery guest's not her father at all, but Joe DiMaggio. He proposes marriage, and she accepts and cries, but it's not the usual proposal crying. And in a bit of not very subtle foreshadowing, he's actually got her by the throat during the proposal, which is very non-traditional. After the wedding, the DiMaggio family act like a pack of bastards. And after Big Joe sees her famous subway grate scene during the filming of The 7-Year Itch, he beats her so badly it shakes the chandeliers. And then they get divorced. The following year, 1955, she meets Arthur Miller, the famous playwright. When Norma Jean conveys some of her thoughts on his work, he's so astounded by her insights, he bestows her with yet another identity. When he projects his dead love Magda onto her, opting to call her that instead of Marilyn or even Norma Jean. Throughout the film, Norma gets strength from a continuous stream of letters from her father, who's been quietly watching her life unfold on television. He promises to come see her in person, but never commits to anything specific. Norma falls pregnant again with Arthur's child, and this kicks off a series of guilt-ridden conversations between her and the unborn infant. Right when it seems like everything's peachy, she trips at the beach and kills the unborn child. Then things start falling apart properly during the filming of Some Like It Hot, when Norma Jean slashes her own face during an outburst, prompting Whitey and her team to throw another needle into her neck to mellow her out as she sits naked in a tub, surrounded by men, covered in her own blood. Arthur does his best to help, but the wheels are really starting to come off the trolley. She doesn't recognize Arthur as her husband, he refuses to work, but her trusty handler Whitey makes everything okay again when he assures Norma he'll summon Marilyn Monroe to come and save her, which he does, and the subsequent transformation's horrifying. When Marilyn shows up at the Some Like It Hot premiere, the entry's lined with demonous men with cavernous mouths all eager to devour her. The settings and the scenes start running into each other, dates and places are smeared across the timeline. When clarity finally returns, she's in the custody of JFK's Secret Service, who hand-deliver her to the president like a meat basket. And then she becomes a meat basket in a scene I can't describe on YouTube, as a Secret Service agent sits reading a newspaper 20 feet away beside an open door. She starts asking herself how she ended up there and concludes it was Marilyn who brought her. So she removes herself from the experience by pretending it's just another role in a movie. And when the deed's done, the beloved American national treasure, JFK, smacks her around. We're then passengers on a feverish roller coaster of day mixed with night and dark strangers lurking in bedrooms and point-of-view pregnancy terminations that I also can't show you and you probably wouldn't want to see. When she wakes from this mess, Edward C. Jr. phones to tell her Chaplin Jr. has died and that he'd left a memento for her. The memento is an old stuffed bear that reminds her of the first child she ever lost. In with the bear is a card from the late Chaplin Jr., telling her the notes from her estranged, tearful father all came from him. There was no father. The revelation pushes her over the edge for the last time. She slips into a deep, drug-induced sleep that she'll never wake from.
The good bits.
Initially, I thought Ana de Armas wouldn't work in this role, but the flashes of uncanny resemblances and some brilliant deepfake technology legitimately makes it impossible to tell them apart at times, even when you pause the movie and stare at the screen, which of course I never did. It's also filmed very dynamically. There's a constant reframing and picture ratio changes, and it switches from color to black and white and back again. It's a very frantic and hectic backdrop to support a frantic and hectic storyline. In terms of acting, everyone held up their end of the bargain, but wow. I knew Ana de Armas could act. I mean, she stole the show in Knives Out surrounded by a dozen heavy hitters. But this girl's just announced herself as a tour de force in Hollywood. In fact, she acted so well, the faint hint of Cuban under her breathy voice doesn't even register beyond the opening 5 minutes. And finally, I've designated this a horror for a simple reason. Yes, the source material is a fictionalized account of Norma Jean's life, so we don't know exactly what's real and what isn't. But if you imagine, just for a second, that all of it was, this is scarier than anything Stephen King could ever come up with.
The shite bits.
There's one shite bit, but it's massive. It might seem like I've chosen to emphasize all the rough bits for this review so I can label it horror, but that's the wrong way around. This movie is nothing but rough bits, and as a combined sequence of events meant to portray a human being's life, they are horrifying. There's nothing insightful in this movie. Her face is either bordering on tears or it's soaked with them. Her expression keeps you tense for 2 hours and 47 minutes, and that is difficult. There are no momentary lulls. You're offered no relief. It's an outright assault. There's not a single lighthearted moment to be found. It is a potent, distilled, concentrated dose of everything potentially wrong with celebrity and Hollywood. And as I've said, it's fiction, so you don't know what's real and what isn't, but maybe that's the point, given the state Norma Jean's portrayed in and the things we do know to be true about her real life. This movie is such a heavy experience, by the end of it, you're left with a Nancy Spungen Sid Vicious vibe, which is not the sort of thing you'd connect with the image of Marilyn Monroe, who's normally heaped in adulation. The simple truth is, you will not see her the same again after this movie, whether you believe it all or not. And it's irreversible. Blonde takes Norma Jean's humanity and her wit and her intelligence, and it leaves her strictly a victim.
The verdict.
So, should you watch Blonde, or should you have yourself a pleasant day instead?
If you're looking a straight-up bio on Marilyn Monroe, just check out her autobiography. But if you want to watch a brutal, relentless, psychological and physical attack on one of the biggest pop icons in human history, Blonde is your movie. But I'm warning you, it is kind of heavy. Until next time, folks. It's me, Johnny, from that thing you just watched. If you enjoyed it, go down there and smash me in the face to subscribe. And if you want to watch another thing, there's one right there. Do it!